Hi, and welcome to the Dan Nessel Show. I'm your host, Dan Nessel, coming to you from the wilds of central New Jersey and the tangled places of my mind. Today, I think you'll really enjoy this episode because I have the pleasure of welcoming Scott Boyarsky, who's the head of digital experience for Fidelity Investments. You know, Scott has spent the last 2 decades or so at the intersection of people and technology, especially at a time when our lives are so enmeshed with the digital world, be it in social media or apps we use, or any of the other numerous daily touch points we have with our many, many devices. Scott is uniquely qualified to lay down some wisdom, and he's a good guy to boot. So without further ado, let's welcome Scott Boyarsky. How you doing, Scott?
I'm excellent, Dan. Good to see you.
Awesome, man. I'm so glad that you're here with me today. So to all my listeners out there, all 3 of you, this is Scott Boyarsky, my close friend and recent friend. We met in the past couple of years, but I'm surprised. I feel like I've known him all my life. We're soul brothers in many different ways. But today, Scott is here to talk with me because we were kind of shooting the shit about something we saw on LinkedIn recently about, how we're getting inundated with, I guess they're kind of ABM practices with like these account-based management people who are using things like LinkedIn Sales Navigator and other tools to target senior level marketers like ourselves. And inbox is getting filled up. And basically, long story short, it makes for a shitty experience, right? It makes for a pretty bad user experience at least from my point of view as a consumer and as a long time LinkedIn user, right? So that got us to thinking a little bit, and maybe we'll touch on that a little bit later. That's just a preamble to say that got us to thinking because Scott really, his specialty or his area of expertise is digital experience, right? 2 decades, Scott's been in the game of digital marketing, product development, and consumer behavior, and is now heading up digital experience at Fidelity Investments. What better person to talk about what makes a good or a shitty experience than Scott here? So Scott, I thought I'd start by just, asking you what is digital experience in your mind? Like, can you just kind of frame that out for us? Because I know it's pretty broad. What is it? What do you dig about it? Free form it.
Yeah,
go ahead,
awesome. Dan, first of all, killer setup.
Thanks, man.
So good to be on here, and really excited to talk about just all the things going on in our industry right now. Digital experience is really best summed up by the lens that the consumer has when they interact with a brand through digital mechanisms. It really is that simple. There's many nuances and layers to what that experience entails. But at the end of the day, it really is that digital connection point, that digital crossroads between brand, service, and customer.
I really like the way that you framed that out. It's all about wins, right? I mean,
it is all about wins. Yeah.
And that's exactly why I think when we're using our whatever various digital tools we use when we're on a platform where we spend so much of our time these days, whether it's social media or whether it's for work, right? We often feel like we're losing. Like you often come out of the experience like going, what just happened to me? But sometimes you come through and go, that was smooth, it was great, or you don't notice it's happening, in which case it's a win. Right. But in your experience, like what are the things, what are the aspects that make for a winning experience? What are the things that, that are a good digital experience? And by the way, do we call it digital experience? Do we call it DX, or what do we call it these days? What's the,
there's so many buzzwords for it. CX is probably the hot hot thing now? What is the consumer experience? And yes, now you have people calling you have new orgs popping up in corporate nomenclature. I'm the head of DX, I'm the head of DCX, I'm the head of CX, I'm the head of UXD, CXD, Marcom D.
Pick it up.
You've got it keeps going. But at the end of the day, I think touching on your point, your observation's correct. Like there's so many experiences that you just leave your head shaking and wondering what were they thinking or what is happening. And it is amazing today, 2020, that digital for many, many companies is still an afterthought or a second thought.
Amazing. That's amazing to me.
Right. Not only that, many companies don't have the wherewithal to understand that they don't have the expertise existing in-house. Many organizations have been very successful at what they do, at what their core business is. But today, every business, no matter what your core business is, whether it be in heavy machinery or financial services or consumer products, they also have a second job, which is as a technology company. And as a technology company, the consumer expectation for digital experience is set by the brands as consumers we all interact with on a regular basis that we love, whether that be Apple or Target or Facebook or Starbucks. That is the bar.
That's the bar, huh? So no matter what company you work for, you have to, in some ways, try to emulate Apple.
You have to, because the consumer expects that experience. They don't come to your company and say, well, I understand they're not Apple, and I'm here buying a backhoe or a heavy machinery excavator. So it's okay that this digital experience is not so good. No, the reality is on their same consumer device, and that's the thing today. The blend today between what you do for your job and what you do in your own personal life are so blended. Today, so much of our work is done on a bring your own device. That bring your own device, the primary device, typically being a smartphone. And that smartphone experience, you all day long, whether you do it consciously or not, you're bouncing between what you do as a consumer. You're on Zappos buying a pair of shoes, and then you're in SAP trying to file an expense report.
All from one device. All from your thumb.
All from one device. And you're really frustrated why, when you try and file that expense report, it's not as easy as buying that pair of shoes.
Yeah, and it's funny because we do that on a regular basis, but we don't think it through. I think as the consumer, as the user, and full disclosure, everybody knows I'm a marketing guy as well, but and I try to think of the customer first. But like many professions, I suppose, the expression "Dr. Heal Thyself" comes to mind. I don't always recognize when something I'm working on, for example, is a bad experience, or maybe isn't hitting the experience notes in the right way they should be, because I'm so married to the content, for example, or it's more important to deliver the content than the way it's delivered sometimes. And then as an employee, working through these various, I can say many things about them, but the various tools of the job, whether it's expense reporting or timesheets or whatever it is that we have to deal with, and every one of them is a different platform, and every one of them is a different tool. The frustration definitely mounts, but I should be thinking of it. I mean, now that you're mentioning it, right? I should be thinking of this as well. What is the experience I'm having here? Not, let's put my frustration aside. how can I kind of look at this and analyze this and think about how I might be able to make suggestions to my company or to our HR department, as it were, or whoever it is, and improve these experiences. It's just something that's with us all the time, I think, is really what I mean to say. And you don't think about it except when it bothers you, or when it's just, when it's not quite right.
That's right. And it's almost become cliche to say customer first. We do everything through the lens of the customer. I have seldom found that to be true.
Yeah.
People in organizations are under pressure to meet numbers, to control budget, to deliver results. And when all of those things, when push comes to shove and all of those things come into play, customer goes to the side, and poor decisions are made. That's why one reason, as a leading digital experience for many brands, I've always put things like the Net Promoter Score at the forefront of what we do.
Sure.
We need to measure satisfaction through the lens of the customer. Are they willing to say they love your brand? They love your product. They love the experience. Are they willing to say they'd recommend it to a neighbor, to a friend, to a family member? Or are they a detractor? Would they say, no way, my experience was horrible? That can tell you that's worth its weight in gold. And so many companies ignore that information.
You mentioned the Net Promoter Score, and I have a little bit of a bone to pick with the NPS just in general, because I feel like it's overused and the maybe misapplied in so many cases, and instead, okay, if you have a brief experience with a customer or consumer, like the consumer goes to buy a bar of soap, right, and uses the soap and it's done, right? The customer has the full range of the experience from when they first saw the advertisement or knew what brand they wanted to whatever that zero moment of truth is, then going to the market and just, wherever they buy their soap. Maybe they like artisanal soap. Who knows? Point is, they get the soap, they try it, they know. And then that day, that night, or even a week later, you can hit them with an NPS, right? And they'll be fairly accurate. I love this product. I'm going to buy it again, right? But what about for much more in-depth or serious or long-term kind of, product relationships or business relationships, whether you're B2B or whether it's a kind of, whether it's a financial services model, or is it, or even, God forbid, pharma, something like this, where, sometimes satisfaction means, the performance of the product. Sometimes satisfaction is the experience with the organization. And that sense of satisfaction changes wherever you are along the consumer journey or the buyer journey, or whatever you want to call your journey. So when I'm looking at it from a B2B standpoint, and the sales cycles can be 3, 5 years, or 10 years even to sell a product that's millions and millions and millions of dollars. At the point of sale, when somebody signs on the line, you better believe their net promoter. I can almost bet that their NPS is going to be 9 or 10. Because they have just put their ass on the line to spend $40 million on something. And they're going to be like, I am behind this. But let's go to like 6 months later, after the big product has been chugging along. And yeah, I'd hope that their NPS is going to be great. But by that time, that kind of, maybe they have a little buyer's remorse settling in because, boy, oh, geez, I just spent $40 million. Or there is a kind of, look, chinks in the armor are starting to show. And then, or maybe they don't like the account rep, or they love the salesman, but they don't like the ongoing relationship manager, whatever the case may be, suddenly you're getting a 7. Why am I getting a 7? And then, 3 years later, when the product is when the installation is complete, or when the product has been running for years, right? Well, that's when I really want to know what the NPS is, right? Because that's when they're really getting the full experience of the product. And in those cases, I don't know what the honesty would be of their answer. Right. Well, so just to finish up my thought there, NPS is one measure. And like I said, I have a bone to pick with it, but it's just as one measure, right? In a universe of different measures that we could apply, it's one great input, but we'd need to find different or additional or supplemental values that would be able to really characterize and validate or add value to that net promoter score. So looking at brand, some brand metrics, for some engagement metrics, for example, with the product, seeing if this person is talking about us at all online or in their social on their social media over time. How does that measure out? These are really, these are kind of, I think, blazing new territory that isn't really being very heavily explored because it's very hard to quantify at this point. But I think there's got to be some behavioral metrics that we can look at to get that. And by the way, I didn't mean to drive the conversation this direction. It just really fascinates me, the whole net promoter score thing.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And where I've seen NPS used most successfully is in a continuum. So it's not a score that is measured once and done. Remember, a customer is a customer before they're your customer, during and after. And it's important to understand not just where they are at the end of that journey. Even if it's a 3-year arc, you want to understand, are they a promoter before, during, and after, and everything in between. So NPS is something that needs to be measured often. Right. And the same person or group, persona type or cohort needs to be measured often. And that's the way I use it. And you're right, it is only one tool. It is not the absolute truth. If you have an NPS 89, that is not the absolute measure that you've won. Social sentiment is important. You mentioned social sentiment. A lot of companies are measuring social sentiment and looking at, where are you showing up? How many likes are you getting? How many shares are your stories getting? How many reshares? How many mentions do you get? All of those things factor in. And historically, they've been more important for direct consumer, or not just direct consumer, but consumer brands.
Yeah, or reputation.
Or reputation.
Right. When you're looking at it from a comm standpoint, less than the marketing side, more on the communication side. You want to look at sentiment heavily. But now we know that you can play that into the entire cycle. But anyway, please go ahead.
No. Right, yeah. That's. I think we hit the point.
Yeah, and it's interesting. And by the way, just also on the side, the tools that are out there now to look at sentiment. I don't know. I'm old enough to remember when sentiment was you measured sentiment by physically reading something and going, I think that was positive, and you check it off on your Excel sheet, and then you go to the next one. Well, that's kind of negative, and then you average it all out. Now, obviously, the science is fairly. That's pretty much what it still is, except it's done by AI now instead of by people. And there are some sophisticated tools out there these days.
You know how many ad dollars were spent based on Nielsen measures in the Nielsen
goodness.
box?
You would tell me, man. That's your area for sure. I'd love to know.
I mean,
billions, right?
for billions, and for years, it was you had one guy that had a Nielsen box in his house, that measured against 1,000 homes, and he changed the channel one night, and that completely would change the ratings of programming, and dollars, and they were all traded based on those ratings. It's amazing, and for years the industry didn't want to let go of that and use absolute ratings, absolute measurement. The web gives us absolute measurement. We know every click, every visit, every interaction.
Yeah, those were simpler times back then, and certainly ridiculous ways to spend your money when you think about it now. You ever read an author named Joseph Jaffe by chance?
I haven't. No.
So Joseph, and I'll plug him because I've become a friend. Well, he's become a friend of mine. I hope that I'm a friend of his. He's a prize-winning author and a speaker, and I seriously admire him. But he's written a couple of books. He comes from the advertising industry, and he was with Ogilvy at some point, and then he wrote this book. He coined the term "flip the funnel," right? Yeah,
sure.
And he wrote a book a while back that I read called The Zero, which was, and I'm going to butcher it, so Joseph, forgive me, but basically it's zero referring to the amount of money that you should be spending on advertising, right? And this is kind of early days of the boom of ad tech and digital advertising. He was way ahead. And now he's evolved his thinking, and now he's talking about companies that are built to suck. Right. That's his latest book is called Built to Suck, and talks about, how large companies basically are incapable of making the strategic choices that they need to compete in this kind of new world we're in. But anyway, just to go back a little bit, it comes down to this idea that the consumer doesn't want to see the advertising, right? And the consumer doesn't want to basically be handled anymore. And the consumer is really in the driver's seat making decisions, which comes back to where I wanted to go with you here, understanding that the consumer is driving the bus, and as Mark Schaefer, another author I admire tremendously, wrote his latest book called Marketing Rebellion. One of his big findings is the consumer's in charge, right? They're in charge. Just give up. Marketers just need to understand this, that the consumer is totally in charge. And I think what you're saying when you talk about winning is exactly that. Exactly that. Acknowledging that the consumer, your customer, your audience is really the master of your destiny now. And you have to, as a brand, acknowledge that they are and design the experience or provide a natural experience such that they are A, in control, and B, kind of respect you for it, right? And therefore they accrue equity to you in the process.
That's right, Dan. That's absolutely spot on. So many companies show up to the consumer as if they've shipped their org chart to the consumer. And that is exactly the point that you were making, which is rather than understanding what the customer actually needs and solving for what they want and providing them with that, they show up with bureaucracy and internal politics, two groups solutioning the same solution for slightly different audiences, both building the same exact solution and putting it out there and confusing the customer who doesn't think of themselves as this segmented audience.
I mean, not the least of which by using the word solution.
Of course, exactly.
So inhuman.
Even our office speak. I worked for a company, I won't mention who, that used to call customers RGUs.
RGU, something unit?
Revenue generating units.
Oh my God.
You and
I'm not surprised.
RGUs.
Yeah. I mean, I've been called worse.
Yeah, but that is that point that you're making, and it's a shame because if it's good for the customer, it's going to be good for the brand.
Yeah.
And if you follow that equation through, if it's good for the customer, it's good for the brand, it's going to be good for business.
Awesome. Yeah. So no, I mean, and that brings me to really kind of to one of the big points I wanted to talk to you about, because the nature of the experience is changing, and constantly changing. I think that's why we have jobs, actually, and is because of this change. If you can stay ahead of the change, like you clearly have for your career, you're in a good position to sort of understand what comes next, to see what's coming down the pike. And, right now we're in an unprecedented era of change. I feel like we always say it's an unprecedented era, but we really are. Nobody expected. And for listeners from sometime in the future, we're in the middle, or hopefully, starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel of this whole coronavirus, COVID-19 shutdown, lockdown situation. Economy's in the shambles. So many people are out of work, and not to mention the fact that 100,000 poor souls have moved on to the next world, and we feel for them, and it's a terrible thing. And sometimes I feel like, and we're talking about, marketing, but the fact is that the world needs to go on. And, what we do, I think, as marketers, and certainly in your realm, Scott, is to make the experiences far more palatable, and if not even palatable, winning, for consumers. Now, what about, though, the fact that this whole change is happening and we're all now working from home, right? That includes all of our consumers. It includes all of our audiences, right? So there's this whole shift to working from home. Yeah, like there's solitude, a lot of solitude. And if it weren't for the digital tools like Zoom or WebEx or whatever that we have to connect with each other, this whole thing would have been far, far worse, I'm sure. But there's the shift. There's more reliance on tools, gadgets, software than ever before, right? Which puts me into a mind of, we really need digital experience expertise more than ever. Not only to, from a work standpoint, to make things better for us at work, but really from a human standpoint, because these are the experiences now you're dealing with. It's not just frustration at, working a phone or working an app. It's, I'm all alone. I'm at home. I haven't seen a human being apart from my family, if I'm a family person, or if I'm, I just haven't seen anybody. And now I'm going to get frustrated by an interface, right? What in holy hell is going on here? So in that environment, doesn't digital experience count even more?
Sure does. I read a funny tweet at the beginning of the pandemic, and the tweet read, "Who's leading your digital transformation at your company? A, the CEO, B, the CTO, C, the CMO, D, COVID-19."
Yeah.
Right. That's the point. And you're right. First of all, I can't imagine living through a pandemic in any other time in history than now. As many struggles as we're facing, unnecessary lives lost, unemployment, people dealing with mental health issues, physical health issues. All of those challenges aside, we have the tools and the connectivity. If we were still an economy that was primarily made up of industrialists and factories and assembly lines, we would be in a far different state. We have many thousands, hundreds of thousands of people globally able to do their full job very effectively from home, and that's phenomenal.
Sure.
As consumers, we've all had experiences now both delightful and frustrating, trying to use our digital tools in ways that were perhaps accelerated. Maybe for those on the bleeding edge, we found it very natural to be ordering our groceries on an app versus walking up and down the aisle. Maybe we thought, maybe I could see sometime in the future I might possibly buy a car over the web without ever actually test driving it. Now, hundreds of thousands of cars are being sold every day without ever walking into a dealership.
Totally.
The expectation now from the consumer is met with frustration when they do have a need for a product, a service. They have a need for that thing, and their natural place today to turn is not going into the closet and grabbing the yellow pages. It's not opening the back of the newspaper to the services section. It's turning to Google and Facebook and Yelp and on and on and on. And they're similar for professional services brands. And then you find that product or service you need. And the winners right now during this pandemic are the ones that have adjusted quickly to be responsive digitally. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's synonymous with advanced, sophisticated technologies and automation and AI and ML. People throw around all these buzzwords. Yeah. We need big data, data lakes, Hadoop clusters. We're in the cloud. Bullshit. What the customer wants is for you to deliver a relevant, personalized, know me. When I show up, know me, be relevant to me, meet me where I am.
And it's interesting. As you were talking, I thought of like the experiences that both, digital and in real life over the last 3 months, and where the winners have been in my personal experience, both from work side and as an employee, but also as a member of the community here who's thankfully has a job and working, but still practicing the social distancing and having to deal with all of the anti-experiences that we have to deal with now. And I was thinking, who's winning? Like, what's the winning experience for you, for me? I thought of Wegmans, right? Have you been to Wegmans around here recently? And full disclosure, Scott lives pretty close to me, so
I've not. I have to admit, I've been supporting our local independent grocer.
Awesome, yeah, they're fantastic. I will give you that. However, I went to Wegmans because Wegmans has a massive liquor store attached to it, so I tend to do the two birds with one stone approach.
True.
And
good point.
Yeah, anyway. You go to Wegmans, a massive store, you're waiting 25, 30 minutes just to get in the door because you have to 6 foot separate from people. And it's a drudgery, right? But you deal with it because this is the world we live in right now. And I respect them. And I respect the staff there who are actually, in theory, putting themselves in danger all the time by exposure to so many people. But anyway, last week I went to Wegmans and I saw a sign that said, scan as you go. I'm like, scan. Wait a second here. Are you telling me that I don't have to stand in line at the end of my journey? So at the beginning, I do. I get that. But the worst part of food shopping for us recently has been the end of it, where you get all your stuff and you've been through it, and then you have to stand in line at the register for 14 years just to get out the door. Well, now, using a very simple app, you scan in the barcodes as you go. It tallies everything up. And then when you get to the very end, you scan one more barcode, bada bing, bada bang, you're done, right? As long as you have an Apple Pay, or not necessarily Apple Pay, but as long as you have a remote payment device. So saved us 45 minutes on the back end. And I thought, they get it, right? That is a great experience and easy and, didn't take much to do. So I thought that was a really good example of a good digital experience these days. What has stood out to you as a winner in these last few months, if anything?
Quite a few. And as you talked about Wegmans, it made me think of something I've been talking about for a while now, which is I think for a few years in the recent past, a lot of us have written off retail, physical location, and beyond that said Amazon is just going to win and beat everybody. And I used to think like that too, until about 3 years ago. I was on, and this is a company that everyone wrote off and thought was dead. I was on Best Buy's website.
Oh yeah.
Because I was price comparing something between Best Buy and Amazon. And I saw that I could buy it on bestbuy.com and that I could drive over, 5 miles down the road and go pick it up and bring it home right now, and I had that experience 3 years ago, and I said, wow, boom, a light bulb went off. And now I've seen other companies that have done this incredibly well. Dan, I like to do a lot of home improvement stuff at my house. I'm constantly, during this pandemic, I've made a number of trips to Home Depot, my store of choice for gathering my home improvement supplies. And what's amazing is I go on to Home Depot's website. Actually, I do it on the mobile app. Their mobile app is great. Find the items I need. I see that they're in stock. I put them all in my cart. I check out. I drive up to the Home Depot, and it's available for me. I don't even have to walk through the rest of the store to get the goods. It's all bagged up, and I walk right out. Sometimes you don't know exactly what you need. They take it one step further. In the app, they tell you where that particular product is located, the aisle, the bin. So my efficiency in going to that store when I need 3 or 5 things, it's no longer, oh, it's such a pain in the butt. You can never find somebody to help you. It's, I already know I need to go to aisle 3, bin 2. Then I need to go over to aisle 16, bin 4. I need to go over to aisle 12, bin 1, find all my goods, and I'm right out the door. And they have not quite as sophisticated as Wegmans, but their self-checkout, you just pick up the scanner yourself and you scan it. But the brand that stands out to me in all of this, the brand experience that I have been the biggest net promoter of, and I want to, I need to throw this caveat. Because when I say the brand, you're going to have some people, some listeners of our thousands of listeners,
absolutely,
that are going to say, those guys, oh, they're anti this, or their politics, the owners of them, the politics. Put that aside for a second. I've got a young family. There's only so much eating at home, figuring out the next thing we can make during this pandemic. So we went out and I saw that ChickfilA was open. ChickfilA already has a top-notch in-store customer experience. They pride themselves on it, and I have to admit I've had a pleasant experience whenever I've interacted in a store.
I am a huge fan of ChickfilA, I will tell you. Especially before I lost a lot of weight, I was a bigger fan, but now I like it every now and then. Certainly, it's an airport go-to.
So, do you have their mobile app by any chance?
No, but I guarantee you that I will be getting it after this conversation. Yeah.
So, download the mobile app. You go on. They've got their full menu. You can customize, order whatever you want, and what they started, and this is amazing, they reacted so quickly to the situation. They expanded the whole operation. So their in-store has been closed for months.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
The drive-through lines are insane. It's wild to watch. They have 2 lines going drive-through, but you pick up the mobile app, you order. So we'll be out, we'll do some errands, we'll drive over to Chick-fil-A, you pull up, you tell the app what spot you're parked in. They've got placards
Mm-hmm.
up. I'm in spot 3. And you get an alert on your phone. It says your order's ready. Someone will be right out. They know exactly what vehicle you're in. They come to you. They hand everything to you. Thank you so much. You roll up the window and you're on your way.
Nice.
It is
Seamless.
Seamless, absolutely seamless. And they never get an order wrong. We're children of the 80s.
Yeah.
We ate plenty of fast food growing up. You always knew the line.
The Joe Pesci, right?
Yeah.
They fuck you at the drive-through.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
I mean,
exactly. We can do poo-poo mouth on this podcast. By the way,
I like it.
Why not? When it's appropriate.
Why not? Exactly. No, but you get fucked at the drive-through. But at Chick-fil-A, never. It's always right. They even remember the stupid sauces that you wanted.
Terrific. That's exactly what I think addresses this whole time that we're in, right? Have a pleasant experience. Regardless of where it's coming from, if you can get through it with smoothly, no fuss, no muss, no frustrations, right? And you end up happy. Not only happy because you're going to have some yummy food, right? But happy because you've been able to fill a need for your family, right? For yourself, for your family, and do it in such a way that's just effortless, and you felt cared for. I think that's a winning formula for any kind of digital experience, anywhere, anytime, anyhow.
It goes back to what we were saying before. If it's good for the customer, it's going to be good for the brand.
Sweet, man. Well, look, I had one more question for you. I think we've covered a lot of ground, but the one question I had for you is, we know now, I think we know a lot more certainly over the last 3 months, but we know as a society, sort of as consumers, as educated consumers, as marketers, we know a lot of stuff that works. And yet we do things that just don't work. We know it happens all the time. Some people theorize that companies are essentially going to be incapable of, the kind of digital transformation that's required to provide these nice experiences. Maybe some companies will be, and they're going to be gone, right? But we know what works, we know what doesn't, and yet what doesn't work often comes up a lot. And I don't know what the solution is to that, but I just wanted to know, in your mind, what do you think are the biggest hurdles that are keeping either brands or individuals from developing or from deploying that positive digital experience?
I think it comes down to a simple concept. If you're familiar with the idea of OKRs, objectives and key results, it's different. Most people today measure KPIs. There's a good book, I think it's John Doerr that wrote it, Measure What Matters. And he talks about OKRs. And it's simply, the title of his book really sums it up. We don't measure what matters. And as marketers, as product managers, as stewards of digital experience, too many of us are looking constantly at metrics that don't matter, that don't provide an objective and a clear key result for that objective. And most importantly, don't do it through the lens of benefiting the customer.
And that's sending brands into tailspins.
Yeah, because you're chasing things that just are never going to be relevant to actually making the business better.
So that's all we need, is to measure what matters, and then we'll be all set. Is the basic idea.
That's if you drink
simple.
If you drink the OKR Kool-Aid. Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, Scott Boyarsky, what a pleasure. This has been a really great conversation. We had a lot of things that were on the list to talk about, and I'm glad we got to some of them and not all of them, because that means I got to have another one of these chats with you, behind the mic and also offline as well. Been a real privilege to have you on. Thank you so much for joining me today. And, I hope to see you here again.
Anytime, Dan. I loved it. It was fun.
You're the man. Thank you so very much.
Yep.
If you enjoyed this episode of The Dan Nessel Show, please head on over to iTunes, Google Play, or your podcast player of choice to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. And please don't forget to spread the word. Thanks again for listening.